Hey everyone, welcome back to the Investment Desk by Reserve One. I'm Sebastian Bea, President and CIO. Each week we focus on three topics: macro markets, crypto markets, and protocol progress. So for macro markets, ECO, we are focused on economic data this week. Number two, Bo in crypto markets. Bo has announced his departure from the White House. What does that mean? And number three, Solana. It is Solana week here at Reserve One. All right, so let's jump into economic data this week. Net has a lot of important data coming out, which can maybe start to answer the question. With tariffs in place and spots and expectations generally set, how is this affecting prices? How is this affecting sentiment? How is it affecting business? So 3 days this week will matter. Tuesday, we have core CPI. That is coming out with an expectation of 2.8% year over year versus the last period, which was 2.7%. So the consensus is expecting an uptick here. We will see, but that number should matter. Number two, on Thursday, we do have weekly jobless claims. So that'll be a good indicator as to how the economy is responding to some of the I don't know if it's certainty or uncertainty, but let's say change coming from tariff policy. And then lastly, on Friday, we have three things that should matter: retail sales, industrial production, and consumer sentiment. So a big week for economic data, looking back at July and trying to understand what's kind of the early read in terms of tariffs on the US and global economy. All right, so let's jump into crypto markets. Today, we're focused on Bo Hines leaving the White House. That was actually in my daybreak email from Bloomberg this morning. It happened a couple days ago over the weekend. So Bo, for the most part, is very clear. His work there is done. They have produced a very strong report. They, as in David Sachs and Bo Hines, that provided guidance on needed rulemaking from the SEC and CFTC, which is already in progress, which is fantastic, and a lot of other guidance that really sets a tone for what the White House wants to see from the regulatory infrastructure as we move forward, as well as on the legislative side. Now, the last page of the document did have a page referring to both the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the digital asset stockpile. Now, it is from here, it is time for Treasury to execute, which is great. But there is a question in the marketplace. And the question is this: how much Bitcoin is there? And right now, it's not entirely certain. So before this report came out, David Sachs had told the market that approximately 200,000 Bitcoin was owned by the government. But when pressed after the report came out, Bo Hines declined to answer. Now, this all comes in the context of more questions from the marketplace. So in particular, the U.S. federal marshals, who are one of the key sources of where the Bitcoin comes from, they actually recently responded to a FOIA request, somewhat recently, and they said that they held 28.9 thousand Bitcoin, so somewhat shy, of course, of 200,000. Now, it's not that as if the U.S. Marshals own all of the government's Bitcoin, but I think market expectations were for the U.S. Marshals to have a very big chunk of it. And in general, the market started to ask questions about whether the U.S. government owns as much Bitcoin as we all thought that they did. Now, Arkham Intelligence at the time confirmed, at least from their perspective, that the U.S. government has approximately 198,000 Bitcoin. But I think it's fair to say the market is somewhat unsettled on this point. Now, going into more detail, and we could not help but notice that the Federal Reserve published a paper on August 1st, looking at revaluing gold reserves and looking specifically at prior historical precedent where countries had done this. We think this comes at a very curious time. So let's just say, and the government, I guess in some sense, has already said that they don't maybe own as much Bitcoin as they want. We don't know how much they have. That there is no official statement at this point. But Bo has said that obviously they want to find ways to acquire more Bitcoin over time. So that's not controversial. So the question is, well, what's a great budget neutral way to get to an ability to buy more Bitcoin? Now, for those of you who recall the interview I did with Frank Chaparro, I think it was back in April when he was on the block and I was still over at Coinbase, There we discussed a way by which the US government could in fact find a budget neutral way to buy quite a bit of Bitcoin. And it's exactly this idea of potentially revaluing their gold reserves. Now, for those that don't know, the US government owns gold, quite a lot of it, but specifically they own it at a price level of $42.02. Now, that is actually in dollars and cents, that's $42.22, give or take. That's approximately in today's value around $11 billion. That puts market value around $886 billion. So back of the envelope, if the government were to find a way to revalue its gold, that could unlock $875 billion of value. Now, back then in April, I did suggest in my chat with Frank that it's something that the government probably should do and definitely could do to find that fresh powder to go and purchase Bitcoin in a budget neutral fashion. Now, how would they actually need to do this? Well, they actually would need to pass a law. So neither Treasury or the Fed can just do this unilaterally. There is essentially something called the Par Value Modification Act of 1973. There's a whole code and everything. It's 31 USC 5116B2. So the government would actually have to write a new law to amend this to either a new statutory price or just to change it to another methodology, say current market price, which seems reasonable. Either way, it seems like, look, we don't really know what's happening, but it seems as though there is some activity afoot, at least at the Federal Reserve level, to at least look at the topic, and they have done that via that paper. We would suggest that this is a great way to find a path towards what the government wants to do, which is to buy more Bitcoin. All right, so moving over to Solana, it is Solana week here at Reserve One. You'll see a couple different posts coming from Reserve One this week. We'll have a who to follow, which will be, I think, great in terms of all the different people on X that you should be following to get up to speed on Solana and to keep track with what's going on. We'll also have an interesting update on called Solana by the numbers. There, we're going to focus a little bit more on TVL, or total value locked. Now, in preparation for this week, we were going back through some of the numbers, and Solana does look actually pretty good in comparison to Ethereum and Cardano on this metric in the relative shorter term. The total value locked in terms of SOL native tokens has been going up rather well in comparison to both ETH and Cardano, both of which have seen a little bit more volatility in the short term. And it's driven by a lot of things, in particular staking and trading type of apps. Jito and Camino are kind of top of the stack in terms of protocols, or rather, protocols with TVL on Solana. But there's other stuff in terms of assets that have got real value on Solana. In particular, I couldn't help but notice Pengu, Pengu. That is the meme point for pudgy penguins, which is now up to $2.4 billion in valuation. Not financial advice, just found it interesting. But have to admit, it's really notable to see something like pudgy penguins really having broken through. This is old news at this point, but you can buy a pudgy penguin at Walmart. So there you go, crypto in the wild. All right, so that's it for this week. It's August 11th. Good luck out there, and see you soon.